2, 3, 4.
Window into a world that I didn't know, you know?
Yeah, it definitely is. It definitely is. And from Compton, I could have easily came out and said, I did this, I did that.
Inspiration comes from meeting people or going outside of the country or going around the corner to my old neighborhood, talking to a 5-year-old little boy. And I have to remember these things. You know, I have to write them down, and then 5 or 3 months later, I have to find that same emotion that I felt when I was inspired by it. So I had to dig all the way deep and see what were the things that triggered the idea.
I done killed a whole bunch of niggas out of front, just giving off fact where I'm from. But that ain't me. I'd rather talk about my reality. You know what I'm saying? I'd rather talk about something a little bit more deeper than that. The reasons and the problem and the solutions behind it. So when you hear these stories in Good Kid, Mad City, when you hear these stories in To Pimp a Butterfly, it's a little bit deeper than just the music.
Okay, so Kendrick Lamar is one of my favorite songwriters. Post his beef with Drake, he's reemerged as the hip-hop cultural beacon, an example of everything right with the culture, and with that, recentered lyricism within the modern rap discourse, which makes sense. For the past, I want to say, 16 years, I'd say he's been one of the most consistent, incisive, and vulnerable MCs to share the hip-hop spotlight, with him reaching the American cultural zenith or grasping the TV top spot this past February with his Super Bowl performance. Many questions have re-entered the chat, so to speak. Is Kendrick for the culture? What are his critiques of America with its structural mistreatment of black folks? Are leftists annoying killjoys for critiquing him? And more importantly, contextually, what does his music communicate in regards to the Black American experience? And is he consistent in a radical benevolent politic? Thankfully, unlike a Beyonce, there's plenty of info about his thoughts, feelings, and beliefs in his work. And we can use the info in his lyrics, performances, and interviews to paint a pretty clear picture of his politics and values. Even while digging into this and the sheer scope of the political climate and how it seems like our personal information is up for grabs due to oligarchical control over our current government, there's so much to worry about. That's where Aura, the sponsor of this video, comes in. We're living in a time of massive information breaches and data leaks. And with that, it's clear that our information can be anywhere at any time. I know I've been personally haunted by so many spam calls lately. These scammers are really out there. Knowing hackers and certain big business tycoons now have access to the social security numbers of so many Americans, having Aura to watch out for my personal info really puts me at ease. What I didn't know is that it takes a company 277 days to report a data breach, which is wild knowing that my info could just be out there for close to a year without me knowing about it. Like your bank info could be breached right now. Do you want to give hackers that 9-month head start? Thankfully, Aura alerts me if they find my phone number, email, or social security number on the dark web. They hit you back fast if anyone is trying to use that info to access your credit or bank accounts too. They also give up to $5 million in identity theft insurance should the worst of the worst happen, and provide so many other online safety features, all in one app. You want data broker removal, a VPN, home title monitoring, antivirus protection, identity or credit monitoring, even a password manager. Hit my link, aura.com/square symbols, to try for 14 days for free. Now's a great time to do so, considering that this current administration is letting anybody have access to our personal info these days. It's better safe than sorry. Again, that's aura.com/square symbols to try 2 weeks for free. And let's get back to the video.
Cap on, drum hole 30, no add on. Little man, I don't wanna go bad on. Big hits, then fold out when you lack on. You ain't no man.
Kendrick Lamar Duckworth, the rapper, songwriter, and Pulitzer Prize winner, was born June 17th, 1987 in Compton, California, the city he was also raised in. A lot of his work, as with any writer, centers his conflicting relationship with where he's from, how his home has shaped him, and how it acts as a reflection or microcosm of how he views so much of America and the world at large. I'm not structuring a chronological breakdown of his discography in the traditional sense in this video, but I would like to briefly go over my overall thoughts with his records in the order that I experienced them. Every album has a really good and funny Kendrick word or phrase that I enjoy, so I'll pop those in and out of each respective record.
Don't worry.
I knew I was in for something different when I heard this one. I know this isn't the first ever project, but in regards to what we'll be discussing in this video, I think at the very least it's safe to say that the conceptual aspect of how he structures his album starts with this one. And even now, it's an extremely mature project, especially considering he was in his early 20s when writing it. The Heart Part 2 was one of my favorite Kendrick songs, and it perfectly captures the themes of this record, which centers his radical self-awareness and his dedication to himself and his faith. While he's attempting to grow, you can feel that he's eager to protect himself from losing a grasp on that sense of self, something he sees in his peers at this age, especially in the growing socially homogenized or samey landscape, as this record was birthed at the dawn of the iPhone and Instagram era. Not to be understated, it was a very interesting time because the new advent of social media brought a new level of awareness and performativity to every social interaction. Kendrick, with his inner city roots and communal creative journey, stumbles into his personal truth with stories of being vulnerable and needing comfort due to past traumas, and feeling himself growing and how that changes his social circle and even his good kid conscience. It's not perfect, but it's still, in my opinion, one of his better projects. Top tier mixtape.
Pussy asshole niggas.
His first full concept album, I think. Well, in the studio album chronology. And don't boo me, but this is my least favorite Kendrick album. But before we get into it, let's go over the themes real quick. Don't get me wrong, it is extremely thematically rich as it explores Kendrick's generation from kind of a campfire storytelling type vibe, in which Kendrick kind of narrates how his life and his peers' lives were affected by the decisions of the Reagan administration. As discussed in so many of my videos at this point, the myriad of policy choices by the Reagan administration had wide-reaching and detrimental or negative effects to the Black community. So much so that Reagan's hatred of Black folks specifically is a meme within Black media.
I hate Black people, Ruckus. That's why I did everything I could to make their lives miserable.
In my breakdown of Rich Men North of Richmond, we discuss how Reagan used what we call the Southern strategy to appeal to working class white people, what he called the silent majority of Americans, who were tired of all the noise marginalized people were making regarding their lack of equal rights. The strategy sought to build a fictional persona of the modern worker, one who was tired of big government. Yeah, homie managed to trick a bunch of white folks into thinking that the government shouldn't do anything. But more important to the video, he scapegoated Black women as the true enemy of the working class via the welfare queen trope. His pre-presidential campaign focused on a fabricated exaggeration of a specific case of welfare fraud. Add to that a Black face to make the villain of the government handout messaging, and you get a bunch of working class whites who, let's be honest, probably had a lot of racial bias, prefer him in their vote to get those sweet government assistance cuts.
Her name was Linda Taylor, and she was identified by the Chicago Tribune in 1974 as a person who had committed welfare fraud while driving fancy cars, including a Cadillac. And very quickly after that, she was given the nickname the Welfare Queen. And it was a nickname and a stereotype.
Who holds the record? She used 80 names, 30 addresses, 15 telephone numbers to collect food stamps, Social Security, veterans benefits for 4 non-existent deceased veterans' husbands, as well as welfare. Her tax-free cash income alone has been running $150,000 a year.
And he didn't say the phrase welfare queen in his speeches, but there was such baggage attached to welfare at that point that I think the electorate really understood what he was saying and really knew what he was talking about. Welfare has been an effective talking point for a whole generation of politicians.
Reagan's quote-unquote war on drugs led to discriminatory sentencing laws that seemed to target Black and brown folks, all at a time where crack magically ravaged communities of color out of nowhere. While at the same time, it's very well documented that the United States got caught trafficking arms to Iran to fund the Contras in Nicaragua. And somehow Nicaraguan nose candy magically just ended up in Black communities. Somehow.
To books, trying to go to school in the fall. Yeah, it's just this new way to help you get into school this fall. You wouldn't be interested. Wait, this can actually help me get into school? Yeah, just a little bit will really help you concentrate on your studies. Plus, you could sell it and save all that money for college. Just an ounce of it will get you up to $100. $100? Wow.
Wow. If I didn't know better, I'd say that Reagan and the CIA manufactured the crack epidemic to criminalize Black and brown folks while destabilizing 2 other brown countries they were looking to extract resources from. But that's just a theory. But back to the record. My gripes with the album is that it's kind of preachy and looks to start a new overarching global movement, one that discards one's ethnicity or gender, that's just really similar to an urban church where you're allowed to curse or whatever. High power, while admirable, doesn't really take a look at structural oppression or have an intersectional framework. But why would it? It was released in 2011. Folks were high off that Obama post-racial Kool-Aid. It was full of optimism, but not a lot of concrete direction. And to be more specific, Kendrick, while a great storyteller, kinda isn't as great when he's rapping outside of himself, especially in his early years. And more directly in regards to conversations about female desirability and S-work, mainly because these aren't specific lenses he has access to. Regardless, plenty of great songs. Also, on my recent listen, I love how he channels Pusha T on High Power. And of course, there are so many classic tracks: Rigor Mortis, Hold Up, and my personal favorite from the album, Blow My High. Great first album. What more can I say about this project that hasn't already been said? It's an incredible story about Kendrick's come to Jesus moment, the events that shaped his strong faith, as he would want us to understand it, I guess. Here we get a closer look at his foundational experiences, along with an extremely compelling story of young love, deception, peer pressure, revenge, and loss told through songs and multiple vignettes, be it voicemail messages left by his mom, banter between Kendrick and his peers, and how he speaks about his relationship with the city he grew up in. Probably the easiest way to get to know who Kendrick is as an artist. Not discussed enough though, I think, is how class plays a huge role in how Kendrick communicates his material reality. Or to put it plainly, how his surroundings impacted his experiences. Not being ashamed of talking about being on public assistance, a nice way to destigmatize, and a humanization of those who are on government programs, especially with the hoops that folks who needed this help had to go through the time. This, in a way, bucks against the specter of the Reagan administration discussed on his previous album, but more importantly, paints a very real picture of life in Compton in the 90s and 2000s. We also have the yearning for material possessions many kids, myself included, participated in during childhood. I feel like this secure, personal lens with which we are able to view Compton with Kendrick changed the culture in regards to what we expect from a concept record, especially within the hip-hop context. The juxtaposition of a curious kid who gets pulled in the wrong direction but survives to tell the story exists as a shining example of the American mythos, a narrative that exists as a proud story of this country tells us about the individual ability to triumph over environmental adversity. Where Kendrick deviates from falling into the trappings of this specific brand of American exceptionalism is to hold both a complex fondness and compassion for the city that made him who he is. Something we'll talk about more, and something that he explores more in his later work, to varying degrees. But by far, this is one of his best. Again, what hasn't been said about this one? Yes, it's unmatched in personnel. The creatives on this record, from producers, other songwriters, and musicians, are top tier, elite. The sequencing and execution is near flawless. The way this album acts as a black music time capsule to express the thoughts, fears, and concerns Kendrick has for the culture, and the advent of blackness as subject to oppression within the American project, all the while wheeling us through this personal narrative of soul searching, coming back home, staying true to oneself, self-doubt, depression, suicidal ideation, and the economic and spiritual journey he's been taking in his mid-20s, mind you. It's an amazing project. Also, just hearing so much Thundercat, Flying Lotus, and knowledge on this project really warms my heart, knowing that they have helped shape so much of the musical landscape, both before and after To Pimp a Butterfly. With that said, I honestly wouldn't call this his best project from a writing standpoint, mainly because of the concern and attention put into the religious grandiosity of it all. We're going to discuss religion later in this video, but his personification of both Uncle Sam and the devil operate in a framework that centers individual reactions to systemic problems in a way that undermines or waters down the overall message of the record. And to that, while so much of the album flows so perfectly, I can honestly say that Mortal Man is my least favorite Kendrick song, in that it centers a sort of sacrilegious deification of powerful artists as if they are above committing harm. Like, I don't want to harp on whether or not Michael Jackson did what. What I am saying is we cannot hand wave potential harm of any beloved artist just because their work is really good. We should always be skeptical of those we see on the big screens. To a certain point, we're all compromised due to us, meaning black folks, not really having full control of the platforms or the things that display our work. And we never will. Not because we aren't able or capable of being powerful or whatever, but because capitalism as a system requires an underclass, meaning the global majority. That meaning black and brown people. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Seeing oneself as a prophet at the end of the journey can feel hollow or disappointing because Kendrick is at his best when he's speaking about himself and his personal experiences, especially the affinity that feels for Tupac, which is explored beautifully throughout the record. The album at the end of the day falls back into the neoliberal trap of marrying blackness with royalty as a way to bolster a sense of pride within the black community, which is okay, I guess, but it also presupposes that one has to be connected to royalty to be important, which just seems goofy to me. So yeah, near perfect album. I can say the last 2 tracks are hard skips though. I wish he left the single version of I on the album, but that's just my take. Feel free to boo me because I know that y'all hate when I'm right.
Your mouth and get some cash, you bitch, you.
Although I'm not sure where to put them, I wish these tracks landed on the previous projects. I definitely would place them over T-Pap's version of I and Mortal Man. I can see why he left them off though. There's noticeably a darker tone with a lot of these songs, be it, oddly enough, Grand Religious Judgment, an early Drake diss, a weird song about different ethnicities, and an anti-scammer song for some reason. All very solid tracks. Untitled number 5 is one of my favorite Kendrick songs. Not much else to say about this one.
Don't judge me, my mama caught me.
While I like T-Pap more from a musical or instrumental standpoint, I feel like the conflict and contradictions he explores in regards to his faith, religion, and identity are done far better here, mainly because he isn't speaking outside of his own perspective or looking to save anyone but himself. And with that, he looks at how he was raised, why certain levels of powerness leave him drained, and embracing faith in a way that makes sense for that feeling, the feeling of being cursed. It's really good. I'd say as good as T-Pap, but only if you listen to the tracks in the reverse order. I'm not sure why, I should better that way. I still can't believe he made modern day U2 sound listenable, but jokes aside, there are very few features as always. Love the stark and kind of cold production. It highlights how the tracks feel. Love the production Steve Lacy did on Pride, and to date, Feel is one of my favorite sad songs. Great record.
Push these bitches off me like push these niggas off me like
To date, I'd say this is his best project purely from a lyrical and writing standpoint. It's not often that we get men who came from similar circumstances as Kendrick have honest conversations about how they use money, wealth, and success to buy things in order to numb themselves from the trauma that they've experienced. Discuss the need to disarm and remove aspects of their masculine performance to see themselves for who they really are. Talk about how hard it is for men and masked folks to ask for support from the loved ones in their lives. Break down one's daddy issues or fully come into contact with how performative masculinity affects them, as well as making an effort to treat one's own son differently, softer, and not be ashamed of that. Unpack toxic reactionary traits to be a better partner. Be honest about your regrets to build confidence and trust in yourself again. Understand your limits, understand generational trauma, and how homophobia and transphobia and misogyny affect your own family dynamic. Though it's flawed, thematically it's very solid, but extremely dense and commands a lot of your attention, which is why I feel like a lot of people didn't really vibe with it initially. There's also the dubious addition of Kodak Black, a man with a checkered past that we'll get into later.
like hi.
Kind of the opposite vibes here. Operates more as a victory lap post-beef and Mr. Morale, there to reaffirm Kendrick's confidence after the deep demon battles he's already done during this battle and prior LP. It's also a vehicle, no pun intended, for him to uplift other West Coast artists and let loose a little bit. It's giving mixtape vibes, but still very cohesive. Gives us a full picture of where he is now and how he feels. Definitely more volatile and boisterous. This record has an untouchable feel meant to bolster strength in oneself. Great for the gym. Along with these releases, we have the Heart series, usually dropped before or with every project release. They offer a little insight into where he is, what his priorities are, and what the project is attempting to communicate thematically. These are also tracks in which Kendrick is at his hungriest as well as most vulnerable. The Heart Part 1 stresses Kendrick's faith in God, himself, and his need to succeed in a culture he sees as synthetic and fractured. All the while rapping over Umi Says by Yasin Bey. Released in 2010 before the Kendrick Lamar EP, the song operates as a clear sign that Dodd is focused on becoming the best. The Heart Part 2 sees Kendrick at odds with the very fake and performative rap industry norms in contrast with his own material experiences in Compton. It's here that he separates himself as the opposing industry darling, bringing the true nature of hip-hop back into the industry. Rapped over A Piece of Light, a Roots instrumental from How I Got Over, released a year prior. The storytelling continues on The Heart Part 3, a tale of apprehension or the slight shock Kendrick is feeling after the proverbial and literal torch has been passed to him. And Good Kid, Mad City has changed the hip-hop landscape. It primarily focuses on how his journey is a collective victory and the result of community support with his TDE label mates J-Rock, Ab-Soul, and Schoolboy Q. The Heart Part 4 is the oddball in the series. One part Drake diss, one part industry warning. It's ominous, foreboding, and pretty cryptic. So much goes... Okay, what are you doing? So much goes unsaid, and the fact that it's one of the few in the series that is solely focused on being so volatile says a lot about where Kendrick's head and heart were at the time. It dropped a little bit before Damn came out. This is probably one of the most interesting ones because it marked the return after a 5-year hiatus in 2022, marking a loose album announcement, making Mr. Morale the first solo LP from Kendrick since 2017. And simply put, it crystallizes the vision for the coming project, embracing the real life situations and live factors that lead to cycles of abuse, pain, and community dissolution. But again, centers great men and faith as a restorative solution to societal failings. Still, low-key a classic with provocative visuals. Finally, The Heart Part 6.
My mom came over today and I was like, mother, I.
Not that one. Kendrick's The Heart Part 6 on GNX signals a return to full acknowledgement of the collective of creatives Kendrick came up with that made his success possible, and how he failed to communicate his feelings to keep those ties as strong as they could be. As with a lot of the themes on GNX, it centers a sort of homecoming, with the SWV sample throughout the chorus, as well as the other California collaborations on the project. Okay? That's generally the bulk of his release history. Now let's do some deep digging into what's said, communicated, and what changes throughout his writing journey to better understand what any of this means. That's right, we're finally ready to start the video. So I decided to split close to everything I was able to grasp into about 6 sections. So let's start with...
If I didn't ride blade on curve, would you still?
Here we'll cover how Kendrick explores love throughout his work, and how it seems to be a leading motivational factor in his relationships with the women in his life, how he views family, and how he relates to his craft. We get early peeks into the vast differences in his writing styles between him and Drake in the track that they both share together, Poetic Justice. Big thanks to Professor Sky for bringing up these points, but within Kendrick's verses, he centers respect being a valued part of his lover's life, and how they both come from rough circumstances as a way of disarming and relating to someone he cares about. Valuing consent, connection, and self-respect as a means of drawing closer is paramount to how he attempts to communicate care and romantic attachment. On the other hand, Drake's verse focuses on shaming a woman he's interested in for making her own choice. He dangles the opportunity of taking her somewhere else as if he's the good guy who knows what's best for her, but she just doesn't want to listen. And this generally is my problem with a lot of his music, and how his fake nice guy persona is really just an act to control the women he doesn't even really like in the first place. But we explore that more here. Compton, later on Good Kid, Mad City, explore Kendrick's complex love for his city as it exists as a catalyst for the expansion of hip-hop culture that enriches life so much that he decided to dedicate himself to the craft. A relationship explored in a more nuanced manner on the song Mama from To Pimp a Butterfly, where the subtle nuances and mundane actions of the day-to-day remind him of his connections to his city, despite the travels and lavish experiences he's had so far, and how he needs to maintain this love or spiritual connection to help heal the problems with the city that nurtured his growth. While Alright focuses on both self-love and love of God as a refuge for the pain of systemic injustices. In that way, it functions as a modern-day Negro spiritual or church song, but its central focus is God's love for the oppressed. Untitled 6 highlights the love and appreciation he has for the values instilled in him by his mother, and how that informs how he treats the women in his life, supposedly, but more on that later. And ironically, Love from Damn seems to be more concerned with self-worth, a call to insecurities that we all have about who we are, and wondering if we'd still hold value if things or circumstances were a little bit different. It kind of mirrors 21 Questions by 50 Cent. The Heart Part 5, as mentioned before, centers a need for healing from cycles of trauma and hurting each other. This perspective comes from him doing some internal work and going to therapy to really grow and love himself, as he sees the things that plagued him personally throughout the communities he inhabited growing up, and perpetuated on his daily in those same neighborhoods. While Purple Hearts discusses his emotional distance as learned behavior within the performative gender norms most men are taught growing up, and how that leads to him lacking in a partnership. And a reminder that listening is essential when someone, especially those close to us, are speaking out of love. Later in that record, Auntie Diaries laments on how what we think might be innocent behaviors or normative jokes made in private can hurt and distance those close to us, especially if they are non-gender normative, but we'll dig into that later. And lastly, outside of Gloria, in which Kendrick talks about his love for writing, I do believe that love plays a huge role in how Kendrick and his Black hippie group mates, the de facto grouping of J-Rock, Kendrick, Schoolboy Q, and Ab-Soul, interact with each other, and how joking around or roasting each other is how they often show love and familiarity with the people that they're close to. So what does this say about his politics? Not much, really. So let's dig a little bit deeper. It's very apparent to any fan or listener of Kendrick's work that these 4 albums, Section 80 through Mr. Morale, are mainly about Kendrick, his lived experiences, and how they contradict or interact with his faith in God through a Western Christian lens. Growing Apart to Get Closer examines how this new rapper lifestyle, as well as what's normal with his peers, differentiate from the spiritual path he's attempting to connect with. It's a strong call to bounce back from material distractions and grow closer to your faith. Shows a lot of humility, which is interesting. There's also a Jehovah's Witness reference, which I tuned into because that's how I grew up. But solid track that bucks against the flex culture of the time.
So in conclusion, we all seem to stumble planning our own demise, forgetting the big picture and making it wallet size. So to what's important in my life, I apologize. I promise to stay faithful, focused, and sanctified. We all get distracted. The question is, would you bounce back or bounce backwards? Would you not know how to act or take action? It's just a part of life, and if your vision's impaired, you'll probably lose it all tonight.
He gets deeper into these contradictions and explores them on Cushion Corinthians, where the pain and rampant loss of life puts one in situations where their faith is constantly tested. I do think that the anti-conformity message that the song pleads you to follow can be a little underdeveloped and loosely dishonest, where Kendrick is telling one to not give into the weight of their environment, but when one is tested in that way, there's really no way of telling how someone will react, which I think he kind of embraces 3 albums later on XXX. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Good Kid, Mad City at its core is about the experiences that shape the foundations of his faith, the loss that birthed his commitment to God, basically his come to Jesus story. While To Pimp a Butterfly details a newfound conflict between Kendrick and the many material temptations of his colossal fame, as well as him looking to maintain his economic positionality or stay paid in America, without losing himself to the American capitalist status quo, with this extractive, or should I say exploitative, relationship with Black creatives. The center of this battle being against the devil himself. That's right, clock the T, the devil is non-binary now. I'm sure this is probably harmful rhetoric, but it's technically biblically accurate. I'd say the tail end of this record doesn't do much with this exploration of faith though, which is fine, because I feel like this battle is at the core of the next album, Damn. Damn in its honesty embraces these contradictions and puts them at odds with Kendrick's feelings on violence and exasperation with how ineffective the talking points on To Pimp a Butterfly actually were. Like, don't get me wrong, it's an amazing record, but it also loosely attempts to save people to some effect by positing or telling them that adopting a Christ-like ethos is the key to liberation for Black folks. And with Untitled Unmastered starting with a very ominous and alarming biblical apocalypse, like seriously, he's rapping about planes falling out of the sky and the 7 trumpets bringing in the apocalypse, which lets us know that he has what I would call a Western normative understanding of textbook Christianity. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but a lot of Christians in the West, meaning Americans, and I'd say some places in Europe and parts of Africa, follow a semi-misinterpreted version of biblical text. An easy signifier of this is the understanding of the book of Revelations, which initially was written in code to warn the Christians of the coming religious persecution that they were going to face, I think by the hands of the Roman Empire.
What's caused people to think that the book of Revelation is about the future?
I think a big part of it is the interpretive flexibility of the book, because it's filled with a lot of apocalyptic imagery that is bizarre, sometimes grotesque, but doesn't have very clear reference. Like there's some fuzziness to what's going on, but it's definitely trying to say something about the experiences of the audience. And because of that, because it's squishy and flexible, it can be reoriented to a variety of different circumstances. And you can read different stories into different figures that are being represented. And so as Christianity grew, it was easily adaptable to a bunch of different circumstances. And I think that's a part of what apocalyptic texts do, is kind of invite the reader to participate in the creation of meaning with it. And we see this all the time today, where people, every time there's something national or international news about some kind of tragedy or some natural disaster or something like that, there are attempts to find parallels in the text, because people think of the scriptures as a Ouija board, as something that's divining the future. And the fact that it is so vague and flexible, I think, contributes to its applicability to all kinds of different things. And it's really funny when you look at some of the earliest history of the Book of Revelation. It was an incredibly popular text.
But over time, through religious texts being funneled into political power systems, things were added and subtracted to these religious texts to exacerbate fear. Why? Because churches and their connected governmental structures understood religion's role in controlling people. That's where the idea of eternal damnation comes from, and hell by and large, as well as like the heavy punishment principles we see in modern Christianity. Sorry for the quick aside, but it's important to the trajectory that we were on. So with these past 3 records, Section 80, Good Kid, Mad City, To Pimp a Butterfly, we have Kendrick growing and excelling to new heights, being able to see the world, and yet it seems like things are always continually getting a little bit worse. Add to that the fact that the tone on Damn specifically is that he's truly struggling with these contradictions, especially with all the suffering he witnesses daily. And the only logical option for his religious framework is that Black people are uniquely cursed to suffer due to some very strange, convenient religious doctrine, which again does more to serve the Western white supremacist power structure. I know this is a lot, but Kendrick's cousin Carl and his messages on Damn really show how, without an overarching Pan-African framework, with Pan-African meaning advocating and acknowledging unity and solidarity amongst African descent, be it on the continent of Africa or abroad, like other places, with the stressed shared goal of collective liberation, like for everybody. Like without that specific framework specifically, it leads to a mythological understanding of religious text, because there isn't really a way to rectify or make sense of a Western religious understanding as a conscious Black individual. How do I know this? Because liberation theology actually exists, in direct opposition to the controlled Western Christian framework. Now, this is an entirely different video that I think Lil Bill already made, but my point being is that religion as it exists is and isn't a steadfast neutral entity. It's always been political or politicized and used for both good and bad ways. For every Martin Luther King Jr., we can point to how American Christian Zionists who infiltrated our government believe in the state of Israel because they think it's the catalyst to the apocalypse Kendrick is rapping about on Untitled One.
Since the founding of Israel, when there's been major wars, American evangelicals who are interested in prophecy have gotten very excited about the possibility that this war is the war that signals the beginning of the return of Jesus to earth, which they believe will happen, and they believe Israel and wars conducted by Israel will be central to that. Every time there's a major conflict in the Middle East, the prophecy talk really ramps up.
With that said, I don't really feel like Kendrick is a full Hebrew Israelite. I personally put him at a 6 on the Hotep scale. So moving on. Mr. Morale sees him stepping outside of religion to address his trauma and how systemic factors play a larger role in who he is and his behavior than he initially thought, allowing him to become his own person and challenge, although not completely, the misogyny and transphobia of religion, with that being like the Western Christian church to be specific. Finally, GNX doesn't really have much religious subtext outside of the prosperity gospel and Man at the Garden. The only focused religious endeavor occurs with Reincarnated, in which Kendrick embodies Tupac to reclaim the soul of Black music. I haven't really heard a lot of people talk about this, so I'll do it briefly. Within the narrative of the track, Kendrick tells the story of a few Black creatives through the history of Black American music and how their otherworldly talent propelled them to success while also detailing their struggles and eventual untimely deaths, culminating with Kendrick's birth and his conversation with God, leading to what I'm calling an angelic purification. Satan, canonically, is a fallen angel. Let's talk a little about Black music and talent being linked to Satanism. We all know the tales of early blues greats and rock and roll legends and how they all have some devil mythos. But why? It's simply because they're Black. Enslaved Africans brought with them cultural traditions and art and ways of expressing themselves that were foreign to the colonizers, leading to our relationship with African customs and music being linked to Satanism. And Black folks, with our continued ingenuity and our ability to express ourselves with limited means, that we continue to defy the imagination of our oppressors, which we can link back to the control-centered nature of Western religion. As always, its main response to anything new is to instantly view it as a threat, which is why your mom probably thought that Pokemon was demonic or whatever.
The thing I noticed about him right off, this is Pikachu. One thing I noticed about him right off was his tail. It's a lightning bolt, and it's a satanic Z.
But to my point here, Kendrick in this track seeks to cleanse Black talent of its spiritual burden by building capitalist institutions and foregoing violence when he can. Again, meh. I guess we can paint these words as being more aligned with neoliberal reform politic, attempting to build Black-owned structures and institutions to cleanse the past. Very American Requiem coded. And that's the religious portion of this video. There's 4 left. Jesus, what is wrong with me? Patreon square symbols if you want to support my weird ass vision.
My diligence is only meant to write your eulogy.
Okay, so this is a pretty easy one. A lot of this work examines systemic injustice from his personal lived experience, so it should be really easy to figure this out. A large portion of Section 80 calls into question a specific generational conversation, as Kendrick addresses the record to those who grew up enduring the effects of the Ronald Reagan administration. Yes, Ronald Reagan, a man who high-key waged war against the black community and destroyed the lives of millions. Peep the Iran-Contra scandal mentioned earlier, or the Southern strategy that's in like half of my videos at this point. With that, there isn't really a sweeping government critique explicitly until To Pimp a Butterfly. From Compton to Congress, set tripping all around. Ain't nothing new but a flu of new Demmer Crips and Republicans. Red state versus blue state, which one you governing? They give us guns and drugs and call us thugs, make us promise to fuck with you. No condom, they fuck with you. Obama say what it do. Which I read as political games played with people's lives in high offices, meaning very little to those at the Capitol Hill. While black Americans and basically everyone else pays for the expense of reckless political theater. It also speaks to the disillusionment felt during the second Obama term, with that administration focusing more on bombing brown folks and deporting people. You can hear a clearer indictment of Americans' political theater in TDE label mates Ab-Soul's song, Terrorist Threats.
Hey, dear Barack, I know you're just a puppet, but I'm giving you props. You lying to the public like it ain't nothing, and I just love it. I hope it don't stop. I don't give a damn, nigga, bang that block. I don't give a fuck, nigga, bang that Glock. I seen an image of Hitler in a picture of when the Twin Towers dropped. Peep the concept. You got progress, you got Congress. We protest in hopes they confess, just proceed with your conquest. I ain't got no gavel. I ain't finna fight nobody battle. I just wanna be free. I ain't finna be nobody's chattel. Period.
I want to like Ab-Soul's music more, but he be having these weird gooner bars that be making me feel a little bit uncomfortable.
Balls deep, you dig? Let me put my mouth where you potty, boo. I touch stock. She sucks.
He's not as bad as Kevin Gates though, so let's move on. The Blacker the Berry affirms the antagonistic relationship that the police have with the black community, painting the police as an occupying force that terrorizes black, brown, and poor people. Solid and pointed political critique. Let's just ignore the end of that song for now. Untitled 5, again one of my favorite Kendrick songs, shows that Kendrick knows how American policies are genocidal towards black people and implies that capitalism isn't a sustainable model for us, while also hinting that maybe this private prison industrial complex is akin to chattel slavery. Just a little bit.
I'm passing lives on the daily. Maybe I'm losing faith. Genocide and capitalism just made me hate. Correctionals and these private prisons gave me a date. Professional dream killers, reason why I'm awake.
But as I mentioned, this is wrapped up in a Western Christian framework that centers individuality and monotheism, or the idea that there is one God and one solution to these broad social problems. Like basically it's highlighting that these are individual failings and not structural ones. Hence my love and I want to say conflicted feeling towards tracks like Institutionalized. XXX actually gives a better way of contextualizing Kendrick's feels outside of an individual responsibility lens.
It's nasty when you set us up, then roll the dice, then bet us up. You overnight the big ripers, then tell Fox to be scared of us. Gang members or terrorists, etc., etc. America's reflections on me. That's what a mirror does.
This makes more sense to me, even though the verse itself is kind of a mess, because it rightfully paints inner city violence as a systemic reality instead of the people involved being morally weak or feeble. Mr. Morales sits with and broadens these contradictions more, kinda, where he finally admits that the systemic pain and trauma don't operate at the epicenter of his experience, and how him taking up space can have adverse effects to the women of his life, as well as his trans relatives. The way in which it does this is interesting, but that's for a future section. There's also a lot of substantive conversation on this project about how systemic oppression mentally keeps communities stuck, but it's a little messy, a little sloppy, and we're gonna get into that. Okay, so religion and his thoughts on the system give a more informed political understanding in which we can see where he's coming from. Homie's leaning more to a Bernie bro with a strong faith in God. No shade, maybe.
Together, sore losers forever, daddy issues. Wake ups, practicing on.
So here we can kind of examine how his work interacts with the concepts of manhood and gender performativity, with earlier tracks having what I would call a mature take on how men are socialized to recoil or be avoidant towards the women in their lives that ask them for vulnerability, commitment, and honesty. Alien Girl Here Today attempts to be a common club banger that examines attraction, be it in an immature way. Like comparing women is weird, but it's mainly about seduction in pursuit of a woman met at a club or something. With the following song, Opposites Attract, Tomorrow Without Her, breaking down how men and women engage in romantic relationships in different ways, which I find more interesting. With the male side of this conversation being steeped in heavy trust issues, consistently doubting his partner because she's consistently doing everything she can, because she's actively contributing to the relationship and would like to become a larger part of his life, all the while he's cheating on her. The second verse switches to the lady's perspective, but instead of painting her off as mischievous, duplicitous, or untrustworthy, we have a continuation of the info from the first verse, where she's asking for kindness, consistency, and to feel like she matters, all the while noticing the signs of infidelity. Instead of lashing out or berating him, the verse primarily focuses on her vulnerable plea to be treated better, even though she admits that he's violent towards her towards the end of it. It's pretty rare in hip-hop, especially in the 2000s and early 2010s, to have a song that details the need for men to disarm, to receive, and perform love, and how, out of fear and a lack of emotional maturity, they choose to play games or hide their fears and insecurities. There's a clear through line with this track and a song he released 11 years later, We Cry Together, although it's a little messier and more raw or honest. This dialogue continues in which male partner's emotional distance due to the lack of communication of his own feelings is the main problem within the emotional discord they're experiencing. It's not all feminist rainbows though. On both Section 80 and the tail end of Good Kid, Mad City, there's a consistent through line of outdated, patriarchal, gendered views towards SW work. I know saying S work or SW work seems kind of redundant, but YouTube really doesn't like specific words. Why is this important? Well, if you're a goofy loser who has a lot to say about folks who do different jobs than you, then I'm guessing you don't really care about this stuff. But in regards to Western countries, especially within the US, folks who do S work, as well as those who have disabilities, experience what one would call the testing grounds in regards to having their rights limited and having to deal with heightened government surveillance. Also, heavy trigger warning, because I'm going to talk about some pretty difficult subjects. So if you can't handle that, I'd suggest skipping to this timestamp. But back to the music. No Makeup, Her Vice. On the surface, it's just a cringe song about a man telling some lady that she doesn't need to wear a lot of makeup to look beautiful. A friendly reminder, because I know it's hard out here, but if you consistently don't like how someone presents themselves, you don't have to hang out with them. A lot of the time when you think you're helping, you really aren't, and you're making the person feel shitty. Take it from me. It's usually just not a good idea. Anyways, the song kind of devolves into a moniker of you don't have to get drunk to have fun, which is true, and reveals that the femme in the song, I think Keisha is her name, wears so much makeup because she has a black eye, to be continued in track 10, Keisha's Song, which primarily is a song about Keisha and how she does S work to survive, and is a minor, I believe. And while there's tons of compassion for Keisha in the song, from a storytelling perspective, and it is compelling, descriptive without feeling super exploitative, any early verses to be clear, it still relies on the tired trope of assault victims being more prone to doing this kind of work because they were assaulted at a young age, and then ends with her violent murder. It's a lot, and alarming, mainly because in regards to normative society, folks who do S work are only brought up to behave as moral pawns for cautionary tales that reinforce gender norms. Add to that, these things are usually super racialized when the actual conditions that S workers live under are never fully addressed. And what's worse is that this story has continued on Sing About Me from Good Kid, Mad City, where Keisha's sister is also an S worker now. Granted, the reasons for this, as alluded to in the song, seem to be socioeconomic, but the language here is worse, kinda. Like, I'm sorry, as a person from a similar neighborhood as Kendrick, granted in the Midwest, but as someone in community with folks who do S work, it's just a lazy and sexist way to paint them off as women who don't know how to be women, and moralizes a person who provides a service. This also assumes that he knows what they need more than they do. These songs are sadly weak spots on these two great records for me personally. But more important to my point, lets us know that at this time, Kendrick, as a benevolent patriarch, centers body purity, at least on the optics front. This misogyny and misogynoir continues on to Pimp a Butterfly, specifically with the track For Free, which is a free jazz banger, don't get me wrong, brilliant execution. The devil here, I think her name is Lucy, on the record, is personified as a sultry black woman with synthetic hair. Level 1 hotepery, where value judgments or respectability is called into question based on a woman's appearance, with their sexuality low-key linked to that. Even though she is someone Kendrick desires, it's important for him to paint her as deceptive, evil, and alluring. This isn't new information, though. I'm pretty sure someone wrote articles about it when it came out. But a lot like a Donald Glover, Kendrick isn't really great when he's writing about black women. Mr. Morale seeks to address these issues, and it does a messy but okay job at it. Die Hard breaks the faux stoic man paradox by opening oneself up to receive hope, be it through the lens of God. Father Time explores the toll that performative masculinity through that stoicism or that unaffected demeanor, and how it robs one of their ability to be emotionally connected with the people in their lives and the ones they love. What are you doing?
We sever them from their mothers, research tells us, far too early. We pull them away from their own expressiveness, from their feelings, from sensitivity to others. The very phrase, be a man, means suck it up and keep going. Disconnection is not fallout from traditional masculinity. Disconnection is masculinity. From Bell Hooks, The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity, and Love.
Auntie Diaries, while not perfect, has a pretty transpositive narrative, be it with extremely sloppy language. The song follows Kendrick's experiences growing up with a trans uncle and how he was an integral part of his development. Towards the end, he also mentions a trans cousin who seems to be in transition, and how Kendrick's behavior and who he surrounds himself with makes them uncomfortable. But still, he understands that it is important to speak against transphobia, kinda. The track more importantly advocates for the rights of trans existence over Western religious doctrine, which I think is personally important. I feel like the discourse surrounding this track kind of centered it as the beacon of trans advocacy, which it definitely isn't, but rather a tale about how a cis person experiences their relationship with their trans family members and how that changes over time. With that said, every trans person can feel how they feel about it. Like I said, it's not perfect. Mother I Sober, probably one of the heaviest songs I've ever heard, explores the topic of generational trauma in black families, secrets, and repressed trauma that leads to coping mechanisms that adversely affect those close to us, and how that burden generally falls upon black women to hold, or for them to endure abuse to maintain quote-unquote peace within the greater family structure. While this track and many others on the album hint to Kendrick's understanding of misogyny and misogynal war, the inclusion of Kodak Black seems to detract from that message. Another trigger warning, brief discussions of SA. Kodak Black, in addition to his many legal troubles, which are whatever, did plead guilty to an essay he committed back in 2016. I have some thoughts as to why he was included on this record, but we'll discuss that a little bit later. What this does signal off rip is that Kendrick has an undercooked understanding of restorative justice. And I feel like this decision, a lot like TPAB, puts a semi-individualistic lens on a larger systemic problem. But even with this flaw, there's still a lot of growth here, which is promising. And to wrap this section up, I'd say he's still kind of steeped in a pseudo-progressive dude space where he's socially attempting to speak to men more than anything else, which is fine. Holding spaces are important.
Like myself, every dog has his day. Now doggy style shall help.
Now we can widen our scope a little bit and understand how Kendrick feels about the industry and the labor attached to his time working within it. There are a few lyrics that hint to him understanding himself as an exploited laborer through his discography. With the fact that he grew up on public assistance, a thing that many working class families relied on during the 90s, my family included, he also understands that the rap industry is inherently exploitative. But even with that realization early on, he states his goal within the grand exploitative game is to use his positionality as the industry anomaly, or someone who is expressly different, to extract as much from the system as possible. At least that's what I think his initial plan was. For Sale, even though steeped in religious symbolism, marries the grand ideas of industry courting black talent and what I would call modern day slavery, where the image, words, and actions of beloved black talent are for sale, obviously. It's here that we have a solid and congruent message of understanding of how Kendrick links the opulence of the industry with its reveling in smoking, drinking, and fast cars, but with the dangling of the ability to materially provide a better life for the people that you love. The song itself functions as a solid reflection of the rampant individualism of big industry contracts, the ability to improve one's positionality for one's family at the expense of their autonomy or creative control. It's also interesting how the idea of money, the devil, and coercion are always low-key linked. But by centering a religious framework, the criticism stops at thing bad because the devil, instead of this system is set up inherently to exploit me. Post To Pimp a Butterfly, Kendrick is solely focused on a heavier black industrialist or capitalist attitude, and that influences his outlook as a foundational fix for black issues, but also acts as a catalyst for him to broaden his network of communication.
My nigga L said, you do a song with Nip, K. Dot, he better crip. I said he a man first, you hear the words out of his lips. About flourishing from the streets, the black businesses, level 4, yard living, given to false imprisonment. Listen close, my nigga, it's bigger than deuces and fours, my nigga. Since elementary, we close, my nigga, yeah, straight like that. I give you the game, go back to the turf and give it right back. Prove your dedication by hopping out the Grand Abs. I'm at the premiere politicking with Top, Nip, and Smoot. Damn, Pac watching the way we grew from dedication.
This also seems to be a direct continuation of his verse Institutionalized, where the scope, desires, and actions of Kendrick's peers don't extend past their needs to survive. Again, work, survival, and exploitation seem to be at the root of how struggle is expressed, but to think that the cure for said conditions is an insular system in which black wealth is built, circulated, and maintained. This bugs me because it ignores the reality of the space that we live in, a system in which grand capital, or making a bunch of money, exists as a result of exploitation. This was one of my main gripes with Mrs. Morale, in that yes, black folks must have intimate and rough conversations about generational trauma for sure, and consistently understanding that our class plays a huge role in how that trauma manifests should clue one into wider systemic wrongs than looking to replicate how white capitalists function. For years, he's been hypercritical of rap industry politics, how it's killed the creative and continues to suck the life out of the art form that he loves. Which means Kendrick has undoubtedly come into contact with black and brown folks exploiting their own people for profit. Hence him repeatedly alluding to the horrors and the decay of the rap industry in his battle with Drake. What grows from a conspiratorial overarching narrative regarding America's legacy of chattel slavery being tied to religious symbolism, followed by an acknowledgement of capitalism, and finally the witnessing of the strange decay and bastardization of the art form he loves, he seems to see himself as a rap deity with the purpose to fix these problems, leading to his cultural moment we're witnessing right now. And he feels like he's in a position to do this based on a different approach, his collectivist framework. So let's explore that real quick. Let's briefly talk about how his discography operates from a collectivist creative framework and where it excels and falls short of those ideological goals. Collectivism refers to the practice or principle of giving a group priority over each individual in it. This plays a huge role in the material success in addition to how he exists as an industry anomaly. And he isn't really alone in this. The era in which Kendrick creatively came up, California in itself experienced a creative renaissance. We have Odd Future popping off around the same time, with young Tyler the Creator, Earl Sweatshirt, Frank Ocean, and many others, going on to release genre-defining albums in the early 2010s. There's also Vince Staples and Mac Miller, and so many instrumentalists in that era, be it Flying Lotus and Thundercat, with their early Brain Feeder releases, brought a jazz fusion and experimental feel to the changing hip-hop landscape. All the while, you can say generally that black music was changing, and the new guard of creatives at some point were talking, linking, collaborating, and helping each other out.
Especially, I'm not like I don't network, I don't go to parties, I don't go to the club, I don't smoke, I don't drink, I didn't grow up making music, I'm not from LA. I'm getting on the blue line to come out here, you know what I mean? So I don't really know nothing or nobody, so I can't just, where I'm gonna get beats from. This before Twitter and all these things was what it was. And he was like, yeah, I'll make you some beats, come over tomorrow. And then I went over there like in a couple days, and then he had beats, so come back, I don't drive, I'll pick you up. He came and picked me up, and he picked me up on
So Matt came and picked you up because you didn't have a whip?
Yeah, he picked me up on Artesia and Downey in the apartment building. He picked me up.
He picked you up on Artesia and Downey?
Yeah, in the Benz with the scrape on the side, playing his music in Mill Street. He like, it's a white boy outside. He picked him up from my granny house on 89th and Hooper. Got out the car, you know, talked to my granny and shit. And I couldn't drive for a minute. I know how to drive, so I was like older, cause we ain't had no car growing up like that, so I ain't no need how I'm gonna learn type shit. But Yeah, we bust niggas around here, but
Mac was just playing your shit. He loved you, bro. That was his whole thing. Vince Staples, this dude, Vince Staples, this dude, Vince Staples. And like I said, when I heard that you barely started rapping, and I heard that shit, I was like, oh my God. Like, come on, bro.
So he barely started rapping, and his shit was just like...
It was just like instantly. Some people just got that thing. Like, he was always supposed to do this shit.
Yeah.
I don't know what he was doing, bullshitting the rest of his...
I feel like this is important because I don't believe great works of art or great artistic movements happen within a vacuum. These things are part of people coming together to create and tell their stories, influence, and support each other. And that's always been at the heart of Kendrick's work, at least until Damn. J-Rock is my older brother. I was there when he wrote. His name on his record deal. We had figured the coast would live on a pedestal once the shit hit the stove. Found ourselves scrambling, trying to figure it out. Soul told me the record shop about to go on a drought. Q ain't got no place to stay and about to sleep on the couch. We eating off each other tray, the dollar menu amount. These experiences not only shape how he moves and functions now, but are a vital part of his love of hip-hop culture, seeing it not as an individualistic pursuit, but a large patchwork of shared influences, challenges, and competition to reach the next peak of self-expression. I generally really enjoy this aspect of his work and see him refining his framework throughout his records. T-Pap sees him reckoning with his success, but attempting to use an incomplete religious collectivist framework to quote-unquote save the hood, without fully acknowledging the material effects of class. Damn has him confront said ideological cockiness and has him struggle with said spiritual ambitions, as is the logical next steps for someone who felt divinely ordained to spread the message and be a quote-unquote savior, while at the same time cherishing the small twist of fate that allowed for him to pursue his dream and make all of this work possible. Mr. Morale explores the yearning for a breakaway from the spiritual distance felt and the conflict with his city in search of a collectivist pathway to heal past traumas through finally addressing community issues. Through all of this, we see Kendrick understand that the time, place, and people that made his life possible connect to his faith, and how these things were both the effects of systemic factors and very specific circumstances. Regardless of gender, they hold a very special place in his life, and that despite this love, his labor within this industry isn't valued or humanized. So humanizing and cherishing the people he came up with should be his priority, because at the end of the day, Blackness specifically is both exploited while criminalized. So with this wide-reaching and broad social framework or way to view the world at a time full of social unrest and economic upheaval, why has Kendrick said next to nothing about the genocide in Gaza, Sudan, or the Democratic Republic of the Congo? Or how come he continues to work with abusive men who directly contrast with his message of being an upstanding and present father? Better yet, in the midst of all this turmoil, why did his Super Bowl performance center Black positionality in America while hinting at a subtle but dated critique of the great American game?
Well, I felt I didn't have a choice because I was selected to be a part of the halftime show, and when I saw what my position was, it was a great stage, a large stage, and we know as a practicing Muslim, our Prophet Muhammad teaches us if you see a wrongdoing or you're aware of a wrongdoing, you must stop it with your hands. And if you can't stop it with your hands, stop it with your tongue. Speak out against it. And if you can't stop it with your tongue, try to stop it with your heart, meaning pray about it. And we know that's the weakest of faith. So I had an opportunity on a grand scale to bring awareness or speak out against a wrong of our Muslim brothers and sisters, because we know if one part of the body is hurting, all of the body is hurting. This ummah is one body. So I didn't want to face my creator and not with a sign of weak faith when I knew I had an opportunity to show.
A culture that does not grasp the vital interplay between morality and power, which mistakes management techniques for wisdom and fails to understand that the measure of a civilization is its compassion, not its speed or ability to consume, condemns itself to death.
Okay, so we're living in tough times. The words consent of the governed have become an empty phrase. Our textbooks on political science and economics are obsolete. Our nation has been hijacked by oligarchs, corporations, and a narrow, selfish political and economic elite, a small and privileged group that governs and often steals on behalf of moneyed interest. This elite, in the name of patriotism and democracy, in the name of all the values that were once part of the American system and defined the Protestant work ethic, has systematically destroyed our manufacturing sector, looted the treasury, corrupted our democracy, and trashed the financial system. During this plundering, we remained passive, mesmerized by the enticing shadows on the wall, assured our tickets to success, prosperity, and happiness were waiting around the corner. It can be easy for us, especially if one isn't super plugged into what's going on around the world, to see the current attack on our rights as a rise or a return to an evil that we thought we already defeated. But with that, a real Kendrick fan knows that his work is full of political disillusionment or disappointment with the treatment of Black people as a whole. So much so that you can really feel how much this weighs on him, and damn. And according to his own words on Mr. Morale, he's had writer's block for a couple years, kinda, before signaling a return with the explosive Family Ties verse, which compared to the frustration and kind of catty indecision on the Heart Part 4 is way more precise and sure of itself. He seems to lean into a maniacal religious persona that has him consistently bringing up his personal channel to God in a way that's a little alarming in its clarity. From here, every move seems super calculated. From making fun songs with his cousin Baby Keem, followed by the Heart Part 5, a personal call for support from the men who share his personal upbringing and circumstances, followed by Mr. Morale, which is low-key a masterpiece that has a Drake sneak diss in the second part of Rich Spirit, but all in all, incredibly dense project that didn't really speak to the target male audience that Kendrick was looking for. 2023, he's not doing much, again, releasing a fun song with Baby Keem. Following that year, as a few hip-hop commentators and video essays mentioned, Kendrick had a calculated Drake takedown strategy that brought a lot of people back to Mr. Morale. An incredible project that has a lot to say about healing and mental health, but center men within that healing. I feel like this informs his politics going forward in more ways than anything, and why he consistently seeks to work with a Dr. Dre, a Kodak Black, and now a Playboi Carti. Personally see this as him being consistent, not in how he leveraged his morality over Drake in the battle, only for him to work with people who also did bad things, but in the spaces that he's looking to create. But let's be real, him making a bunch of allusions to Drake's character and then calling him out for being a PDF file and saying that he isn't safe to be around, or that women and minors aren't safe to be around him, only to then consistently invite men who have actively harmed women, is hypocritical, especially since these individuals have been extremely violent to women, allegedly. I have to say allegedly because people can sue me. And with the advent of Meet the Grams existing, Kendrick painting himself as an insightful family man, only for him to collab with a known deadbeat dad who cosplays as a vampire in 2025, is just funny. I'm sorry. But more to my point, I feel like his framework of what's just, where the industry needs to go, and what needs to be done seems to center him being involved to be the better alternative than the culturally detached individual. He's attempting to create a holding space for troubled men. Not the Cynthia Ariana meme, but more or less a pathway space for men to link into more progressive spaces. And that's loosely admirable, but rooted in a misunderstanding of restorative justice. Restorative justice refers to
a way of thinking about behavior correction in a way that emphasizes healing the harm done, whether to a person, group, or object, rather than punishment for the sake of punishment itself. At its center, it's a flexible way of thinking, rather than a set of guidelines or steps. Restorative justice seeks not to isolate or incarcerate any community members for causing harm to the group, because it doesn't actually make the community stronger, and it results in the often permanent isolation or loss of a community member. Rather, by making the individual face the effects of their actions and work to provide reparations for their misbehavior, the community's bond strengthens as a result of the communication, trust, and understanding that it takes to engage critically with conflict.
Okay, so this is my take on this man's actions, who is by and large kind of a capitalist who's trying to do the right thing, but going about it kind of the wrong way. Hence his incomplete use of this framework, specifically with Kodak on Mr. Morale. Him saying that he, due to his lived circumstances, could have ended up in the same position as Kodak, only to build community compassion as the community as a whole works to heal from the past harms. The problem here is the effort isn't really put into a conversation about the harm caused in the first place. What we get instead is a very public veneration of a person who's caused life-altering harm to another person. What's worse is that Kendrick's "I am the culture, take over" mentality and recent collabs with Carti puts him in the sticky moral position of selective moral culpability, or folks are only responsible for the bad things that they've done if they have a problem with Kendrick. At worst, this calls into question Mr. Morale in the first place, even though he already told us that he chooses himself over everything. Personally, I feel like he's attempting to work within this framework of repairing harm to build a better and more compassionate Black community, but he's attempting to do so by skipping key steps, which is to be expected when you look at what we explored earlier within his music. Kendrick centers religion and his relationship with God as a Black man first and foremost. No shade to anyone's religious faith, but operating in a Christian patriarchal framework leaves you vulnerable to being inconsistent and counterintuitive. And to be clear, it's not the religious aspect of this that makes you incomplete or fallacious, but it's tied to a patriarchal or male-led standard that leaves it open to this annoying and visible failure. When you tie that into his silence on social issues that people are tuned into, you see that homie is kind of not really concerned as a new member of the professional creative class.
Mamadou Tall is a PhD student in the Department of Africana Studies at Cornell University, a dual citizen of the United Kingdom and the Gambia. Last year, he was suspended twice for joining a demonstration calling on Cornell to divest from Israel. He faced deportation until massive protests pressured Cornell to allow him to re-enroll, thereby extending his visa. In February, Mamadou described the victory during an interview with Democracy Now!
With, as you said, public pressure, support, Cornell University backed down, and I'm allowed to finish my degree. However, I am still banned from campus. I'm allowed in one building on campus to work. I have to fight to be able to get library access. And I think there's somewhat of a great irony that students who are protesting apartheid are now subject to forms of exclusion, bordering, and apartheid, with our movements restricted, and we're only allowed to go to designated places on campus.
Like, personally, I don't like the NFL, but I had to admit that it was nice seeing an artist that, in regards to their work I'm so close to, get that Super Bowl opportunity. Only for that opportunity to be a little underwhelming. Like, a little. I liked it. Love the imagery, but it kind of rang a little hollow as we dove into a more turbulent 2025. Rather, it centers playing the game the right way, an experience very familiar to Black Americans, with a need to code switch and curb our communicative norms within the American game to procure resources just to survive. But with that, we can understand that no amount of respectability can save us, hence him ditching that to play Not Like Us at the end. And sure, there are so many other small references and nods and certain things, but let's be clear that he's rich, he's talented, he's professional, and he's looking to protect that positionality and comfortability as he feels like it's owed to him. I mean, yeah, but to be honest, it's owed to everybody. I feel like he's in tune to the decaying industry that he's a part of, not just the music industry, but the American dominance as a whole. But is less concerned with principled resistance and more concerned with being the face of the culture for men specifically. He's in an interesting space where as empire dies, side note, art never will, but as life as we know it here changes, he has the ability to be the face of the culture, to lament what's owed to Black people instead of the interconnected extraction that is happening to Black and brown people abroad. So I don't know. It seems like although the role as the benevolent father of the culture here in America seems to be the focus now, he's not interested in exploring how that oppression links to folks abroad and how that connects to what's happening here. Or he's not willing to forego collabing with figures who, let's say, have harmful past with Black women because their place within the culture is too important to do so. Hence his lines at the end of Mortal Man. And while I still love his music, it's looking like his adherence to a now embarrassing neoliberal alignment, as well as his ties to major corporations, hinders him from actually saying anything radical at all. Why talk about the Congo when Apple, the company making billions selling phones that use conflict minerals, are the folks funding your cultural pop-out show? Why speak out against the genocide in Gaza when so many music execs have a funded interest in the proliferation in the settler colonial state of Israel? I mean, if you know how to play the game, then you know who to attack and when, what to say, and how to say it. It's all in the game. But yeah, that's my take. What do you think? What's your favorite Kendrick project? Feel free to sound off below. And if you want videos like this early, want to see exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, feel free to subscribe to my Patreon linked below. You get vids like this early, as well as your names and the credits, like these lovely folks scrolling by now. If you can't, a like, a comment, and a sub go a long way. I'm actively looking for these self-righteous Kendrick fans in the comments, so we'll see if that happens. I'll also be on tour for these dates, so let me know if you're in any of the cities. Come through. It's going to be a collection of great shows, and I can't wait. And with that, peace.